This video is brought to you by Squarespace. It was sleek, it was fast, and it was supposed to be British aviation's comeback. Yet how did a jet with better technology, earlier development, and the full backing of BEA end up in the shadow of the Boeing 727? Why was the Trident shrunk, slowed down, and sabotaged by the very people who commissioned it? And did Boeing really steal the idea? This is a story of ambition, delay, betrayal, and a jetliner that could have changed the world, if only it had been unleashed. This is the Trident. The turboprop airliner was dead. Long live the jetliner. Well, not quite. While airlines like TransCanada were diving into the jet age with aircrafts like the C-102, others weren't so sure. British European Airways, BEA, doubled down on turboprops in 1953, backing the Vickers Vanguard. It was fast for its time, cruising near 428 miles per hour, and far more reliable than early jets. And I do mean reliable because the same year the Comet, the world's first jetliner, began breaking apart in midair. Safety wasn't just a buzzword, it was a reason to stay grounded. But there is something to be said about British-French rivalry. In 1955, Sud Aviation had flown its brand new Caravelle and was starting to use it on inter-European routes. The new jet age competition had arrived, whether or not the British wanted it. So, BEA reluctantly decided to introduce a few short-haul jet-powered aircraft, leaving the longer routes for the turboprops. But none of the current jet aircraft on the market would do. It would have to be a second-generation jetliner that didn't have the stigma of the earlier crashes. BEA outlined their vision for this new jet. It would need to be able to carry a payload of some 20,000 pounds or some 70 passengers up to 1,000 miles, cruising at a very high speed of at least 610 to 620 miles per hour and have more than 2 engines. So the race was on, and not only would BEA beat the French back, but it would also be through proper British engineering and gusto. Hey! So if you're looking to start your own business, or if you've got something that you're really passionate about, like I do about aeroplanes, then you've got to use Squarespace. I use Squarespace for my own online merch store. And Squarespace now has an amazing AI website creator that you can use to create your own bespoke online digital identity. And using the drag and drop technology, it's super easy to modify and create the website of your dreams. But also Squarespace can be used for so much more. You can run email campaigns, or you could set up an educational portal. So if you want to teach something, Squarespace is the place to go. But I don't come empty-handed because I can give you 10% off your first website or domain at squarespace.com/found. That's right, use my code FOUND because then you help me, you help the channel, and you help make all of this possible. 4 British companies were chasing BEA's vision. Bristol offered the Type 200, a sleek 4-engine jet. Avro pitched the ultra-futuristic 740 Trijet, and Vickers proposed the VC-11, a small sibling to the VC-10. And de Havilland, well, they came back with 3 options, 2 of them based on their aging Comet. But as I mentioned, BEA wasn't keen on the Comet and asked them, what's new?
So what is that? What is new?
You?
Yes. What do I tell them?
Well, what did you tell them?
I told them I would ask.
What are you blathering about?
Customers are asking what is new.
What should I tell them?
What did you tell them?
I told them I would ask.
So in July of 1957, they submitted something different, the DH-121. Now, this was no half measure. It was the world's first serious trijet airliner proposal. It had 3 rear-mounted engines, a range of over 2,000 miles, seating for up to 140 passengers in a high-density layout. And the logic was sound. The 3 engines meant better fuel economy than 4, but more safety than 2. And BEA's specification explicitly asked for more than 2 engines, so they knocked that one out of the park. And those engines were to be Rolls-Royce Medways, big, powerful turbofans with nearly 14,000 pounds of thrust each. Each one would power its own hydraulic system with triple redundancy. The planes were designed to be cutting edge, with variable incident T-tails, an offset nose wheel to fit a canaverous avionics bay, and the electronics years ahead of their time, with automated landings, triplicated flight systems, 2-to-1 voting logic, and in the late 1950s, this was pretty much all science fiction. BEA liked what they saw, and by early 1958, the DH-121 had emerged as the frontrunner, and talks began to make it official. But this was Britain in the late 1950s, nothing moved quickly. The government was growing tired of its fractured aviation industry. They felt that there were too many small players, too many dedicated efforts, a holdover from World War II. It wanted consolidation. Fewer companies, bigger groups, stronger exports. So de Havilland, proud and fiercely independent, had other plans. They proposed a broad manufacturing partnership. De Havilland would build the fuselage, Bristol would handle the wings, and other firms like Hunting and Fairley would take on the rest. But Bristol wasn't having it. They didn't want to join de Havilland's party. They wanted to beat it. So instead, they teamed up with Hawker Siddeley to form their own rival group. Why all this drama? One reason: money. BEA's potential order was worth over £30 million at the time, nearly £900 million today. And that was just the start. Whoever won this deal had a shot at the global short-haul market as well. In February of 1958, de Havilland, Hunting and Fairley officially banded together under a revived name, Airco, a callback to Geoffrey de Havilland's early career. But the government wasn't thrilled. One minister remarked, "This is not quite what I had in mind." Still, both the Airco group and the Bristol Hawker Siddeley team pressed on with their respective designs. The latter of which would even pitch their Type 200 design to Pan Am. Yes, that Pan Am, in a last-ditch effort to secure international interest. The idea was, if they had an international partner, it would make it significantly cheaper for the British to buy their product. So the Bristol team reached out to BEA and said, "Hey, don't decide yet, we've almost got Pan Am, and once we get them, it's going to make your order cheaper." But BEA was leaning hard towards the DH-121 already, and when Lord Douglas publicly stated that the airline was just waiting on government approval to proceed, that was it. The rival Type 200 was dead, and de Havilland had won the battle. But they were all of them deceived. For in the land of Seattle, in the fires of the Renton Assembly, the Dark Lord Boeing forged in secret a master jet. And in this plane they poured all of their cunning, their range, their payload, and their cabin flexibility, and their will to dominate every regional airport on Earth. It would be one jet to rule them all, the 727. Boeing had been studying the short-haul market since 1956, and in 1959 they made their move, officially launching development of their own trijet, the 727. Airco executives, perhaps still clinging to hope, floated a bold idea. What if Boeing dropped their jet and partnered with them to build the DH-121 instead? Just like how Bristol was trying to get Pan Am to help build the Type 200, if Boeing built this British jet in America, why, the sky was the limit. So Lord Douglas himself pushed the idea forward. Meetings were arranged, Boeing engineers were flown to Hatfield in the UK, and the British laid everything bare: performance data, market research, design philosophy. Boeing returned the favour with a tour of their own Seattle facilities. But this time, the hospitality stopped at the hangar door. De Havilland saw very little and didn't have a clue about the 727.
All right then, keep your secrets.
But people would only connect the dots when Boeing would finally reveal their design of the 727. It looked suspiciously familiar. It would have 3 rear-mounted engines, a T-tail, a cabin built for the same number of passengers. It was as if the Trident had been copied, with some improvements. Still, the Trident had its own momentum, and on February 12, 1958, the British government finally authorised BEA to begin formal negotiations. The airline announced its intention to order 24 of the 121s, with options for 12 more. But believe it or not, the government stalled signing on the dotted line. Why? Well, rival Bristol pointed out that it would be great for the labour unions if the airline went with the Type 200 instead. So BEA, in an equally cunning move, said if they don't get the DH121, they will go back to France and order their Caravelle instead, which got the government to act and finally put their trust back into Havilland. After all, they had already built the world's first jet airliner, the Comet. And so by April, the final design of the DH121, I guess we could call that the Airco 121, was locked in and they were excited. The company's market research department was forecasting that as many as 550 airliners in this category would be sold in the next 10 years. And a wider fuselage was even added to allow 6 abreast seating, more in line with the rising trend of economy travel with up to 111 seats on board. And with that change, the Trident was finally becoming the right aircraft. Just the wrong time. By 1959, BEA had cold feet and had still not yet signed on the dotted line to begin production. Why? Because passenger numbers weren't growing as fast as expected, and the airline was suddenly nervous that the DH121 was too much of an aircraft. It was too heavy, too ambitious, too future-proof. So BEA did something extraordinary. They asked de Havilland to shrink it. Not tweak it, not adjust it, just shrink the entire plane down to match their latest forecast. Now, on paper, these concerns made sense. A recession had hit the airline industry. BEA had a whole fleet of Vickers Vanguards about to enter service, and the original DH121 was encroaching on long-haul territory with those 6 abreast seating, overlapping with aircraft like the Comet and even the new 707. They didn't want a plane that could grow with the future. They wanted a plane that would fit next quarter's numbers. But de Havilland, incredibly, agreed. Despite their own market research showing other airlines wanted this larger version, and despite knowing the risk of designing a jet for just one customer, they went ahead with the redesign. Because they didn't have a confirmed order yet. And Bristol was still circling like a hawk with their smaller Type 200. What had once been a disadvantage, the small size, was now a selling point for Bristol. And this made sense too, because you see at the time Boeing and Douglas were also downsizing their own 727 and DC-9 projects. It was felt that the original large DH121 would have to compete against the Convair 880 and the Boeing 720 some 4 years after the respective service entries, and thus would find the market full and closed. Whereas a cutback design would be more competitive against the then projected 75 to 100 seat twin-engined DC-9. So the Trident was cut down, literally and enthusiastically. Its powerful Medway engines were swapped for smaller Rolls-Royce Spays, with 40% less thrust. The wings were clipped and its range was halved, but its weight was dropped by a third. And the seating capacity fell from over 110 to around 80 passengers. 6 months after BEA made this request, the redesign was complete, and this would be the aircraft that BEA would finally order, 24 planes with 12 more as options. It was smaller, simpler, and safer perhaps, and it would finally be named the Trident after its 3 engines and triple redundant hydraulic systems. A beautiful name for a jet that had just been gutted. By 1960, the Trident wasn't just being redesigned, the entire British aviation industry was. The government forced a wave of mergers, rolling de Havilland into the Hawker Siddeley group and scattering partners like Hunting and Fairey into rival groups. Airco, the short-lived consortium that had started it all, was disbanded, and the Trident's future was no longer entirely its own. These political delays, plus the delays of BEA signing on the bottom line, and all of the other problems with the redesign, meant that the Trident lost its lead, and worse, it lost the spotlight. Because Boeing's 727 sales had taken flight, and taken off in every sense of the word, it was already winning orders worldwide. Even airlines that preferred the Trident on paper, like Trans Australia, chose the 727. Why? Because their competitors had, and no airline wants to be the odd one out on fleet commonality, especially on a remote continent. So with sales lagging for this new Trident aircraft, they turned to the British military. This new pitched redesign would have bigger wings, more powerful engines, and even have plans to carry nuclear missiles. Rolls-Royce proposed a new engine for it, the RB177, which would have transformed the Trident from underpowered to unstoppable. And military orders would have funded the engine development to bring the Trident up to 727 levels and beyond, essentially making it similar to the original HS-121, and I want you to remember that. But the RAF changed course. They rewrote the specs, picked a cheaper option, and gave the contract to a Comet-based design, the Nimrod. And with that, the last chance to use the Trident as a military plane disappeared. Meanwhile, Hawker Siddeley was still trying to salvage the civilian market for the aircraft and saw an opportunity to turn stateside, just like Bristol had tried with Pan Am. They pitched the aircraft to American Airlines. And God, in a twist of irony, AA actually asked for a longer range version with more passengers of the Trident. Ironically, the original DH-121. The one that BEA had forced them to shrink, it would have been perfect. So a new version was proposed, the Trident 1A. It would have more powerful engines, bigger wings, and more fuel. But this was too late. American went with the Boeing 727. Some of these changes were quietly folded into the production model, now called the Trident 1C, but it would only be a modest range boost with a larger center fuel tank. And finally, after all these years, it would fly. On January 9, 1962, the first Trident lifted off from Hatfield Aerodrome. It was the jet BEA wanted, but it wasn't the jet that the world needed. When the Trident finally entered service on April 1st, 1964, it was sleek, sophisticated, and already outclassed. BEA quickly loaded it into their European network, replacing turboprops like the Viscount and Vanguard. But even as more Tridents arrived, 15 by 1965 and 21 by 1966, there was a growing problem. The plane didn't go far enough. Yes, that's right, it's the damn shrinking problem again. It didn't have the range. Routes were expanding and competition was heating up, and BEA's once perfect jet was already too short-legged. So Hawker Siddeley offered upgrades. First came the Trident 1E. It would have more thrust, better wings, and a denser cabin with up to 140 seats. This brought the jet a little closer to what the original DH-121 had promised, but it still lacked power, 7,000 pounds less thrust than planned, and only found a handful of buyers in the Middle East and Asia. But some airlines would make it work. In fact, Channel Airways crammed one of their jets with 149 seats using a 7-abreast layout, which was not a comfortable ride. Then came the Trident 2E. It would have a longer fuselage, more powerful Spey engines, extended wings with tips, and last enough range to reach destinations like Beirut and Moscow. This was Trident's high point. BEA bought 15, Cyprus took a few, and China became its savior. China's national airline, CAAC, eventually ordered 33 Trident 2Es, making it the largest non-UK operator. The Chinese models were customized with simplified systems, traditional control yokes, and extra crew positions. And these jets would go on to serve until the 1990s, and even into military service with the People Liberations Army. But back in Britain, BEA wanted more, and they needed capacity, fast. So Hawker Siddeley offered two bold ideas. One would be the HS-132, a two-engined Evolution, 158-seat Trident lookalike. And the other would be the HS-134, a true Trident successor with engines under the wing, looking eerily similar to the Boeing 737. But BEA thought to themselves, why not just get a 737 instead, and pick up some 727s on the side as well? But the British government, still in charge of the purse strings, said no. They told BEA to buy British or buy nothing. So BEA went back to Hatfield and ordered a stretch, the Trident 3B. It would just be 5 meters longer with up to 180 seats, but still the same engines. It wouldn't be able to take off cleanly at hot and high airports, so the engineers got creative and added a fourth engine. It would be a tiny booster jet, the Rolls-Royce RB162, tucked into the tail like a secret weapon. It was only used on takeoff, but it gave just enough extra thrust to get the heavy aircraft airborne. The 3B entered service in 1971. This would be the final form of the Trident. It would be bigger, heavier, and still chasing the market that had moved on. And despite all the efforts, export success was limited. China took 2 Super Trident 3Bs, and most other airlines passed. And while the Trident racked up automatic landings, broke new ground with auto-land technology, and served reliably through the 1970s, its fate was sealed by noise. In the 1980s, new airline regulations required hush kits or re-engine aircraft. The Trident's central engine design made both options a nightmare. British Airways, by then the successor to BAA, chose to retire the fleet rather than try and refit it. So on December 31st of 1985, the last British Trident made its final flight. And the Trident series died with a whimper. In total, just 117 Tridents were ever built. Boeing 727, designed to the original DH-121 specifications, sold over 1,800. And so ended Britain's boldest civil jet program. This jet was fast, it was clever, it was safe, but it was also over-engineered, underpowered, and tailored to the wrong airline at the wrong time. And in the end, Boeing 727 truly became the one jet to rule them all.